She handed me divorce papers with the same smile she used to ask for help with her thesis. One minute, I was clapping like a fool in the second row, shirt pressed, tie choking me in June heat, watching her accept that stupid embroidered hood like it was the crown of Rome. The next, she was gliding down the aisle toward me in her little victory robe, arms wide like I was part of the act. "We did it," I expected her to say. Something corny, something rehearsed. Instead, she leaned down in front of the whole damn auditorium, pulled a manila envelope from her tote, and said softly, like she was giving me a gift, "These are just logistics. It's been over for a while, Martin." No one else heard her, just me. But everyone saw it. Her friends 2 rows back laughed like it was a joke. One of them even snapped a picture. I wonder if they framed that moment, if they remember the look on my face. I didn't say a word, just opened the envelope, scanned the pages, saw my name neatly typed beside hers, and a yellow tab marking where she wanted me to sign. Of course, streamlined, efficient, like everything else she learned from academia, so I signed it, right there, ballpoint from my pocket, no hesitation. And then I stood up, squeezed her shoulder like she'd just won a damn spelling bee, and walked out the side door. She didn't follow. She didn't call my name. Why would she? She had her hood, her handshake from the dean, and a front row seat reserved for her next admirer. I was just the warm-up act, the sponsor, the husband with the benefits. I didn't even hear the rest of the ceremony. I couldn't tell you what the keynote speaker said. Probably something about perseverance, vision, making sacrifices. Funny word, that one. Sacrifice. 10 years of night shifts, 3 canceled vacations, 2 personal loans under my name so she could attend unpaid fieldwork in Peru. And the kicker? I cooked the dinner party that helped her impress the same professor who wrote her final recommendation. Beef bourguignon. I still remember how she said it needed more salt. If you're still reading, by the way, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Over 97% of folks who listen to these never do, and I'll be honest, every single one helps the team keep stories like this coming. Real stories, the ones that don't end with applause. Anyway, when I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have. Not in temperature, just in silence. There was a tightness in my chest, not pain exactly, but the kind of twist you feel when you realize someone rehearsed your betrayal down to the font size. I walked to my car, or rather, her car. I'd given her mine the year before, said she needed something more reliable. I drove the old Civic I'd had since undergrad. It started on the first try, like it knew. No calls, no texts, just the chirp of the tires over hot pavement and the occasional notification from a spam folder. Back at the house, our modest little rental with the mismatched IKEA furniture and the bookshelf we built together from 2 broken dressers, I didn't pack with anger. I didn't throw things. I folded shirts. I unplugged the toaster. I even watered the plants. Because some part of me still believed that decency mattered, even in the face of open betrayal. The one thing I left behind was the cast iron pan. She hated it, said it was too heavy for scrambled eggs. That felt like enough of a goodbye. By the time she returned from whatever post-ceremony brunch she floated into, I was already on the road. Highway 40, heading east with the windows down and a prepaid phone vibrating in the glove box. No music, just the wind, and that peculiar clarity that comes when a man realizes he's not angry anymore. Just done. Done being the support beam in someone else's cathedral. Done being the ghostwriter in a life where she signed every page. There was no plan, just distance. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The second she got home from the post-ceremony wine bar, still wearing her cap and gown like a costume she didn't want to take off, Elena noticed the quiet. Not silence, not absence, just quiet in that peculiar, disorienting way that makes you pause at the threshold and think, something's wrong. She expected to find Martin on the couch, maybe with a beer in hand, remote on his thigh, pretending he wasn't bothered. That was his thing, right? Bottle it up, let it ferment into another weekend argument. She had already rehearsed her lines. It's not about you, Martin. This is my growth season. But the couch was empty. So was the coat rack. His worn leather jacket, gone. So were the boots he never replaced. The key tray by the door held only her spares. Even the dog's leash was missing. She checked the garage. His Civic wasn't there. It was strange how fast her brain went into logistics mode. Not panic, not guilt. Just tabs opening in her mind like a browser overheating. Maybe he went to his sister's, maybe to a bar, maybe he's being dramatic. She pulled out her phone. No missed calls, no texts. So she typed one. "We should talk. You left pretty fast today. I wasn't trying to hurt you." She stared at it a moment, then added, "Let me know when you're ready." Green bubbles. No, delivered. That annoyed her more than it should have. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of white wine, left over from the graduation stash, looked at the fridge. The magnet with their trip to Colorado was gone, just a faint outline left in the dust. When her mother called that evening to ask how the day went, Elena skipped the part about the envelope. "He didn't take it well," she said, brushing lint off her lap. "Is he okay?" her mother asked. Elena rolled her eyes. "He'll come around. He always does." She didn't mention that his closet was empty, that the spare key to the lockbox was gone, that even the router password, his usual domain, had been reset. She opened her laptop, logged into their shared bank account. A screen popped up. User access revoked. Now that made her pause, not out of worry, but confusion. She tried to call again, straight to voicemail. The number no longer accepted messages. That night, she walked through the house like a stranger in her own memory, drawer by drawer, door by door, realizing he hadn't just packed a bag. He had extracted himself. His books were gone, not just his favorites, all of them. His tools from the shed, not a wrench left behind. Even the box of old cables and tech junk he'd always promised to deal with eventually. Cleared out. She stood in the bathroom doorway, looking at the empty spot where his electric razor used to hum every morning at 6:05. No note, no slammed doors, no warning shot, just absence. Clinical, surgical. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't know for weeks, was that Martin was already halfway through Kentucky. He'd traded in his Civic for cash, used a throwaway email to close the bank accounts, bought a used truck under his middle name, booked a month-to-month cabin rental near a coastline he'd only seen on postcards. The prepaid phone had only 2 numbers stored, a local grocery and a storage unit. No contacts, no cloud backup, no breadcrumbs. The mailbox had a new nameplate, M. Hale. It wasn't meant to be clever, it was just neutral. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't playing dead, he was subtracting. And Elena, between her congratulatory comments and celebratory champagne selfies, didn't realize that Martin hadn't just left the house. He'd left her world, completely. And the strangest part, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt confused, as if she'd thrown a match expecting fireworks, and the sky went black instead. Elena's apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the downtown skyline, a world away from the beige walls and humming fridge of the old rental with Martin. She furnished it in 3 days. Sleek shelves, soft rugs, chrome everything. She bought wine glasses that didn't match and called it eclectic. It was the first time in a decade that every decision in a room was hers alone. Within a week of moving, her social media lit up like a storefront. Photos of her posing with faculty at her new university. Panels, lectures, a blurry shot of her holding a mic with the caption, "From student to speaker, finally free to thrive." Her inbox filled with invitations, research luncheons, feminist salons, networking brunches. She leaned into it, bought a whole new wardrobe, traded cardigans for blazers. Her signature look became bold earrings and a glass of Sauvignon Blanc in hand. At one of the welcome mixers, a senior professor clinked her glass and said, "Here's to being brave enough to start over." Another colleague chimed in, "Some men are stepping stones. You didn't trip, you climbed." They all laughed. Elena smiled, but not with amusement. It was satisfaction, recognition, the kind she never got when Martin stood beside her at fundraisers, quietly disappearing into the wallpaper. By month 3, she had a new haircut, a new scent, a new dating profile that read, sapiosexual, PhD, no time for boys, only men. The first man she dated post-Martin was a postdoc in environmental psychology. He quoted Rilke, made pour-over coffee, and had opinions about ethical polyamory. It lasted 5 weeks. She told her friends it ended because he wasn't emotionally literate. Privately, she thought, he didn't cook. Martin used to cook. But she didn't dwell. There were more matches, more events, more reasons to smile through lipstick. Back in the coastal town Martin had driven to with one duffel and a quiet engine, life moved differently. He rented a studio above an old woodworking shop run by a guy named Silas, who never asked questions and only spoke in monosyllables before noon. Martin paid cash, bought a secondhand mattress, 3 plates, 2 mugs, and a coffee maker. He got up early, walked the beach before the sun warmed it, came back, put on a flannel shirt, and sanded walnut for hours until his arms ached and his mind went still. His hands became calloused again, like they used to be in his 20s, before academia made him feel like he had to trade sweat for status. He didn't follow Elena on social media. He didn't have social media. But once, while flipping through a local art magazine in a cafe, he saw a column about rising academic stars. Her name was bold. Her face was lit perfectly. He stared for a moment, then flipped the page and kept drinking his coffee. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes at night, he could still hear her laugh at parties, not with joy, but with performance. That bright, practiced sound that always landed half a second too late, like it was rehearsed. He didn't hate her. He just no longer adjusted his life to fit her volume. Elena, meanwhile, fielded comments on her posts like, "You're such an inspiration. Goals. Proof that women don't need to settle." She'd reply with emojis, hearts, fire, gratitude, and every time someone asked, "What happened to your husband?" she'd smile and say, "We just outgrew each other." What she didn't say, because it didn't fit the narrative, was that she hadn't expected the silence, the absence of resistance, the lack of aftermath. He didn't argue, didn't grovel, didn't return for closure. He simply vanished, so neatly, so decisively, it made her feel, at odd hours, like she had been the one left behind. But she'd shake it off. There were lectures to give, papers to publish, conferences in Portugal. Success, she believed, was the best eraser. Except even as her world expanded, the absence of a reply never shrank. 1 year, that's how long it took for Elena to remember the exact rhythm of his voice. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those overcast academic days, the kind where the university felt like a film set everyone had already wrapped on. She was in her office sipping bitter coffee from a department mug that said, "Tenure, because I'm worth it." Someone down the hall was playing an old folk song through their door speakers, nothing she'd ever cared for. But the second a male voice hit a low note, her body reacted. Not her mind, her body. It sounded like Martin, just for a second. And that second cracked something she thought was sealed. She turned to her computer, opened a blank message, and stared at the blinking cursor. No salutation, no sign-off. Just making sure you're okay. She read it 3 times, then clicked send. The number hadn't bounced. Yet. An hour passed, then a day. No response. No read status. Just that terrible stillness, like trying to listen through fog. By evening, she was pacing her apartment barefoot, drinking wine from a stemless glass, not because it was elegant, but because she'd broken the last of the matching set in a move. She'd said it didn't matter. She was making space for new beginnings. Another lie that sounded better than it felt. She checked the phone again. Still nothing. 2 months later, on his birthday, yes, she still remembered it. She tried again, more direct this time. "I still think about you. Hope you're happy." She paused, then added a little firework emoji. It felt juvenile. She deleted it, sent the message bare. She even kept the phone volume on for a full day, a thing she never did anymore. Nothing. That night she opened the app for their old joint bank account, out of habit, or maybe a need to feel tethered to some kind of record. Her login still worked, but the account? Stripped, not just of funds, though yes, his pension deposit had been fully withdrawn, but stripped of him. His name had been removed from the access panel entirely, as if he'd never existed. There wasn't even a transaction trail. He hadn't just moved money, he had moved identity. She closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a while, listening to the soft hum of the building's AC. It took her another hour to decide what to do next. She opened her phone again, scrolled through photos, past lectures, restaurant meals, sunsets from hotel balconies, half-hearted grins with half-interesting men. Then, without overthinking it, she sent one more message, a photo of their dog, Murphy, a golden retriever with a graying snout and eyes that still lit up when the front door creaked. Martin used to say Murphy knew how to tell time, always sitting by the window 15 minutes before he got home. The caption below the photo read, "He misses you." It was her first message without pretense, no posturing, no subtle digs about growth, just a truth. Still, silence. And that silence didn't feel triumphant anymore. It felt off, like staring into a hallway that used to have pictures on every wall but was now stripped bare. She went to bed without brushing her teeth, something she hadn't done since grad school. She told herself she was just tired, but she knew better. In her classes, she taught her students about empirical gaps, the spaces in data that begged for explanation. Uncertainty was a feature of the academic process, she'd say, an invitation to explore. But Martin's silence wasn't uncertain. It wasn't an opening. It was an answer, a clean one, a brutal one she had no hypothesis for. Still, she tried to rationalize. Maybe he was bitter. Maybe he was doing it to make a point. Maybe he was living some sad, dusty life somewhere and didn't want her to see it. But what if he wasn't? What if he had built something without her, not in spite of her, just outside of her orbit? That was the first night she dreamed about him. Not romantically, not longingly, just a flash. He was standing behind a counter, carving something, hands covered in sawdust, a little music playing. He looked up at her like she was a stranger, and somehow, in the dream, that was worse than anger. It was indifference, clean, quiet, finished. It happened on the third day of the Behavioral Ethics Conference in Boston, one of those academic carnivals where every conversation smells like ambition and panel discussions bleed into cocktail hours. Elena was wearing a black jumpsuit and a lanyard with 3 ribbons hanging from it. Speaker, author, award nominee. She'd just given a presentation on The Narrative Power of Reinvention, a tidy little lecture on the psychology of new beginnings. It earned polite applause and a handshake from some think tank director with too much cologne. At the post-talk mixer, she found herself at the wine table, pretending to care about the difference between 2 Merlots, when she heard a familiar voice over her shoulder. "Dr. Lanehart?" She turned, already smiling, and froze. It was Jeremy, one of Martin's old colleagues from his stint teaching undergrad economics. 10 years ago, she used to see him at their apartment, eating her cooking, laughing too loudly at Martin's dry sarcasm, asking to borrow books he never returned. He looked older now, thinner, but the eyes were the same. "Jeremy," she said, keeping her voice light. "Wow, it's been ages." They hugged like former neighbors at a funeral, awkward, brief. After the usual small talk, she asked casually, "You still in touch with Martin?" Jeremy blinked, took a slow sip of wine. "Martin Hale? Not for years. Last I heard, he cashed out his pension and just, poof, went off-grid." "Off-grid?" she echoed. He nodded. "He sold everything. Phone number changed, email bounced, didn't even leave a LinkedIn trail. Some say he moved out to the coast and builds furniture now, or boats, something with wood." He laughed like it was absurd. "Man always was too smart for this racket." She forced a laugh in return. "Yeah, well, he liked quiet." Jeremy smiled politely and drifted away, already zeroing in on someone else with tenure in their title. Elena stood still for a beat, hand tightening around her wine glass. Off-grid? Cashing out a pension wasn't casual. That was commitment. That was finality. Back at her hotel, she opened her laptop and typed his old email into the search bar. Nothing. She tried it again. This time she sent a blank message, just to see. Bounce back. Recipient not found. She opened Facebook. She never used it much, but Martin used to tag her in photos when they still pretended to be happy. His profile was gone. She scrolled through Messenger, hoping to find their old chat. Even that was deleted. As if he hadn't just deactivated, he'd opted out of the entire platform. She tried his sister. They weren't close, but once upon a time, she gave Elena a bracelet for her birthday and called her the calming force in Martin's chaos. The call rang once, then straight to voicemail. She left a message. "Hey, it's Elena. Just wanted to ask about Martin. Nothing dramatic, just, if you hear from him, can you let me know he's okay?" No reply. The next day she texted. 2 gray check marks, never turned blue. An hour later she was blocked. No warning, just silence, sealed shut. By Friday, she was dialing the number for James Brennan, the lawyer who'd handed her the divorce packet with a polite nod and a confidentiality waiver. She hadn't spoken to him since. He picked up with the same dry tone. "Brennan." "Hi, it's Elena Lanehart, formerly Hale." A pause. "Yes, of course. I was wondering, by any chance, do you have a forwarding address for Martin, or maybe someone I can contact? It's nothing legal, just personal." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, Dr. Lanehart, but I haven't heard from Mr. Hale since the documents were finalized, and legally, I'm not authorized to provide contact information, even if I had it." "Right," she said, biting the inside of her cheek. "But you don't have it." "That's correct." "Do you think he told you he was disappearing?" Brennan chuckled faintly. "I think he told me everything I needed to process a clean exit." She hung up soon after, stomach buzzing, not with panic, not yet, but with a growing edge of something she didn't like, being outmaneuvered. She'd always assumed Martin was the passive one, the reactor, the reliable satellite orbiting her sun. But now the satellite was gone, and it hadn't crashed. It had left the system. No crater, no wreckage, just space. That night, she sat in her hotel room and stared at the unread texts she'd sent months ago. They looked like monologues in a play no one was watching, and for the first time she wondered if silence wasn't weakness. Maybe it was strategy, and maybe, just maybe, he'd meant for her to feel it. She didn't mean to sound dismissive, not exactly, but it slipped out like secondhand smoke, habitual, unconscious. They were sitting outside a wine bar after a grant committee mixer, Elena and her old friend Natalie. The conversation had meandered from new fellows to bad dates to, inevitably, Martin. Natalie leaned in, her tone careful. "Do you ever think about him?" Elena sipped her Syrah, shrugged like it was no big deal. "He wasn't strong enough for my world." The words landed flat. She meant them to sound clinical, inevitable, like she'd outgrown a jacket or a hometown. Natalie didn't nod. She didn't look surprised. She just said, "He worked 2 jobs so you could finish your dissertation." Elena looked away. "He did what any husband would have." "No," Natalie said. "He did what a better man would have. Most wouldn't." The silence between them lasted longer than either of them liked. Eventually, Natalie changed the subject, something about a fellowship, but the damage had been done. Elena heard her own words echoing back to her with the sour aftertaste of a bad theory. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her apartment was too cold or too quiet, or maybe it was just her head, suddenly full of noise that had been dormant for too long. She got up and went to the hallway closet, the one that still held a box marked Thesis Drafts Archive. She hadn't touched it in over 2 years. Inside were old spiral notebooks, post-its, scribbled timelines, the kind of chaos you only understand if you've spent 6 months arguing with your committee. And wedged between them, folded into a legal pad she used during her stats prep, was a stack of handwritten notes. Not hers, Martin's. Same neat all caps he used for grocery lists. But here, they were annotated passages, counter-arguments, summaries from articles he never had to read but did anyway, because she was behind and panicking and he'd stayed up until 3 a.m. for 5 nights straight. One of them ended with, "This author contradicts herself in the 3rd paragraph. Use that. You'll win that fight." Another said, "You're overthinking this. Trust your voice." Her throat tightened before she realized it. One hand went to her chest. She wasn't crying, just about to. The way you stand at the edge of a rooftop and stare down, not because you want to jump, but because you suddenly remember you could. She set the notes on the floor, took a step back, sat against the wall. The thing that cut deepest wasn't the words, it was the voice inside them. How clearly he'd seen her, how much faith he had in her brilliance even when she didn't, how none of it had been performative, and how thoroughly she'd rewritten the memory. He wasn't strong enough. She could still picture him hauling a broken printer up 3 flights of stairs because she refused to submit her proposal in courier font. Could still hear him arguing with a tech at midnight because her external drive fried the night before her qualifying exam. But those weren't the moments she kept in the narrative she told others. She had simplified him, flattened him into a trope, the guy who didn't keep up, the man left behind. And now, holding physical proof of his investment, she felt fraudulent. For months, she'd said things like, "It was the right call. I needed to grow." Some people are just stepping stones. But this ink, this effort, wasn't the work of a stepping stone. This was foundation. She grabbed the notes, opened her phone, took a picture of one. Her finger hovered over the message box, and then, impulsively, she deleted it. Deleted the photo, deleted the drafts, stuffed the papers back into the folder like they were leaking something radioactive. She told herself it was nostalgia, that it didn't matter, that people grow apart. She turned off the lights, went to bed, and stared at the ceiling for an hour, wondering why a man who wasn't strong enough had done more for her than anyone else ever had. She didn't text Natalie back the next day, didn't go to the department's networking brunch. Instead, she found herself sitting in the campus library lobby, watching other people walk by with their backpacks and books and tired eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt like an imposter. Not because she had failed, but because she had lied. To them, to herself. And worst of all, to the one person who had never asked for credit. It was supposed to be a routine hallway chat, one of those career-boosting, you're on our radar nods from someone too senior to text, but just visible enough to shape the tenure process. Elena had just wrapped a guest lecture on institutional ethics, packed with sharp quips and rhetorical flourishes, the kind that earned her knowing smiles from grad students and raised eyebrows from the old guard. She was headed toward the faculty lounge when Dr. Lathrop, the Associate Dean of Research and someone with 4 decades of clout behind a very gentle voice, caught up beside her. You've still got that edge, he said, tapping the folder in his hand. Your writing, it's got that scaffolding under the spark. Very few people still build arguments like that. Elena smiled, poised. Appreciate that, sir. He glanced down at his folder, almost as an afterthought. Actually, funny thing, I was reviewing some grant proposals this morning, federal funding round for sustainable systems modeling. Came across one that absolutely sang. You would have loved it. Streamlined, clean language, big ideas, no fluff. Made me think of your early work. She tilted her head, flattered but curious. Anyone I'd know? He tapped the corner of the folder. Guy went by Mr. Hale. No institutional affiliation, but the proposal's tied to a P.O. box out on the coast. Proposal was about modular behavioral feedback loops and predictive modeling. Very elegant stuff. She nodded slowly, smiled, swallowed, then froze. Mr. Hale. Martin Ronald Hale. She hadn't said his middle name aloud in years, but the moment Lathrop spoke those letters, it hit like a thump in her chest. That old echo. Is he with a think tank? She asked, too casually. Lathrop shook his head. That's the odd part. No CV, no publication history, no social presence. Just a clean proposal and 2 pending patents, reviewed like a dream. Elena kept the smile pasted on while her stomach shifted. Well, she said, clearing her throat, good to know the coast is producing thinkers. Indeed. He patted her arm and disappeared into the stairwell. She didn't go to the lounge. She went to her office, shut the door, and pulled out her laptop like it was a weapon. First, the grant database. Lathrop hadn't been lying. There it was. Mr. Hale, proposal number 2317B, listed as independent contractor. No university listed, no cosigners, just that coastal P.O. box, Chatham, Massachusetts. She blinked. Chatham? She opened another tab. Patent directory, searched Mr. Hale. 2 recent filings, both approved. One for a dynamic behavior loop applied to decentralized feedback models, academic speak for digital trust systems. The other, a patent on modular adaptive interaction design, vague but promising. The kind of patent that could get snapped up by a startup or government agency within months. She cross-checked the mailing address. Same box, same coastal town. He was writing, inventing, designing, thriving, not hiding, not sulking in some sad beach shack surrounded by beer cans and unfinished novels. He had rebuilt, quietly, intentionally, and he hadn't used her name, not even once. That last part stung in ways she didn't expect. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. What had she told people? That Martin had fizzled? That he was more comfort than fire? She'd spent the past 3 years telling the world she left dead weight behind, but dead weight doesn't file patents. Dead weight doesn't write world-class grant proposals without even using an institution's name as leverage. She clicked back to the proposal and reread the summary. The voice was unmistakable, dry, precise, unassuming, a kind of power that didn't need to shout. Martin had always written like that. She remembered him editing her dissertation chapters. He'd never cut for length, only clarity. Don't let the idea drown in its own echo, he used to say. Now here he was, speaking again, and she was no longer the audience. She stared at the screen and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Not guilt, not shame, alarm, because the story she'd told about him, the one she'd repeated at conferences, over drinks, at brunches with colleagues, was falling apart. He hadn't failed. He hadn't vanished. He had waited, and then launched. And the most infuriating part? He hadn't needed to tell her. He just was. She told herself it was just a break, not an investigation, not a chase, just a spontaneous trip for some air, a getaway before the next round of departmental reviews. That's how she phrased it to colleagues, to herself, to the assistant who booked her ticket. A few days alone, no schedule, somewhere quiet, coastal. She didn't even say where, just picked a stretch of Massachusetts coast that looked appropriately rustic and removed. She rented a room in a restored inn with exposed beams and zero Wi-Fi, the kind of place marketed with phrases like digital detox and intentional silence. It took her 2 days to admit she was looking for him. Not openly, just in the shape of silhouettes that passed too quickly, in the back corners of coffee shops, at the hardware store with old wood siding. Every man over 6 feet with graying hair and hands that looked like they belonged to someone who worked with tools made her pulse catch. By the 3rd day, she'd given up trying to pretend otherwise. The town was small, just a few streets crisscrossing between the harbor and the highway, and yet he remained invisible, or maybe just good at vanishing when it suited him. Then she found the gallery. It was a storefront tucked between a bait-and-tackle shop and a bakery that smelled like molasses. No sign outside, just a hand-carved placard that read "Found Things." Inside, the walls were bare wood, the lighting soft and natural. Everything smelled like pine and varnish. The pieces weren't paintings or photographs, but sculptures. Clean, smooth, powerful things made from reclaimed wood and metals. Abstract, but intentional. That's when she saw it. The sculpture was small, maybe knee-high, resting on a pedestal with a linen drape beneath it. Carved from dark walnut, the piece featured a broken circle, shattered precisely at one seam, and inside the broken gap, a folded wedge of carved wood, like a paper tucked inside a ring. It took her a full minute to breathe. She knew it. Not the sculpture, the symbolism, the circle, the paper, the marriage, the divorce, the ceremony. She stepped closer and read the plaque. Ceremony. Artist. M. Hale. Her hand clenched the strap of her bag. A woman at the front desk noticed her stare and walked over gently. Beautiful, right? That one gets a lot of attention. Elena kept her voice level. M. Hale. Does he have other pieces? The clerk nodded. Yes, a few more in the back. He works with us occasionally. Very reclusive. Doesn't like openings or interviews. Elena forced a smile. Does he sell much? Oh yes. Most of his proceeds go to local shelters, some to refugee aid. He doesn't really keep anything for himself. Elena looked back at the sculpture. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was precise. A clean cut. A wedge placed intentionally, as though someone had folded a message inside a wound and left it there, exposed but composed. She looked again at the wood. Walnut. Martin's favorite to work with. She used to tease him about it. What's wrong with oak? Too common for you? And he'd reply, oak just announces itself. Walnut lets you discover it. Now here he was, discovered, and somehow more distant than ever. He hadn't just rebuilt his life. He had turned their implosion into art. She wanted to ask for a contact, a number, a mailing address, but something stopped her. The sculpture said more than any voicemail ever could. She circled the gallery slowly, pretending to browse, but her eyes kept drifting back to that one piece, that broken circle, that paper-thin crease. It was elegant, brutal in its restraint. She wanted to scream at it, shake it, explain yourself. But it didn't belong to her, not anymore. She left without buying anything, without asking questions, but she walked slower on the way back to the inn. Her steps had weight now, like she was dragging something behind her that only she could see. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring out the window at the dull shape of the harbor. So he hadn't fallen apart. He hadn't disappeared into sadness. He had refined it, extracted meaning, compressed pain into craft. And what had she done? Spoken on panels, signed copies of her book, said things like, sometimes you have to leave people behind to become yourself. Now she saw what he had become, and it made her wonder if she was ever the one doing the leaving at all. It took her 4 days to work up the nerve. The address wasn't listed anywhere public. She'd found it the same way she used to find rare citations for her dissertation, by reading between the lines. The gallery invoice on the pedestal base had a shipping note, no return address, just a local courier code and a set of initials tucked into a delivery log. It led her to the edge of town, past the harbor's tourist veneer, down a gravel road where the air smelled like wet wood and salt. The building wasn't marked, just a weathered barn tucked behind a row of cypress trees, sunlight leaking through the slats like it didn't quite belong. There was no welcome sign, no hours posted, just a dented mailbox nailed sideways to a fence post. She parked down the road, unsure why. Maybe she didn't want to be seen arriving. Maybe part of her still believed this wasn't real, that she could turn back and pretend it never happened. But then she walked up the gravel path, one foot in front of the other. No speech prepared, no goal, just a thudding heart and a door in front of her. She knocked. The sound echoed too loud in the stillness. A moment passed, then another, and then it opened. He looked older, not aged in the way people do when they've suffered, but aged like something hand-carved. His hair was streaked with gray, his beard was fuller, his frame leaner, stronger in some strange way. A man who'd been living in the open air, working, breathing. She hadn't seen his face in over 3 years, but every inch of it came rushing back like it never left. His eyes landed on her, calm, curious, not cold, not warm either, just clear. I didn't know where else to go, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, said nothing. I've been trying to reach you. I saw, he said quietly. I just didn't answer. That stopped her, the way he said it, without malice, without regret, just truth, the kind of truth you couldn't twist. She stood there, shaking slightly. I was stupid, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I had to become something without you. I thought that was strength. His eyes didn't waver. I forgave you, he said. She looked up, startled. I did, he repeated, softer now. A long time ago. She exhaled, a strange mixture of relief and something sharper. But that doesn't mean, he added, stepping back half an inch, that I'll let you back in. The space between them expanded with those words. She nodded, slow, absorbing the weight. I'm not here to fix anything, she said. I don't even know what I'm here for. He looked at her for a long moment, and then, almost gently, said, Maybe you're here to understand what you walked away from. She blinked. He didn't say it cruelly. There was no edge in his voice, just the finality of someone who no longer needed to be heard or validated or redeemed. You look well, she murmured. He smiled faintly. I work with my hands. Sleep comes easier now. She laughed once, quietly, not because it was funny, because it hurt. Do you ever think about, she started, then stopped. I don't dwell, he said simply. That was your gift, remember? Reflection. I always lived forward. She looked down. Do you hate me? He shook his head. No, I just don't carry you anymore. The words didn't hit like a slap. They landed like gravity. And suddenly she wasn't standing at a stranger's door. She was standing in front of a life she once held and then discarded, assuming it would stay on a shelf somewhere, waiting, collecting dust. But it hadn't waited. It had walked forward. He didn't invite her in. He didn't close the door either. She took a step back. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not making me feel small. He gave a slight nod, and then, only then, did the door close. Not slammed, not locked, just closed. And as she walked away, the wind picked up slightly. It smelled like cedar and varnish, like something being built, something solid. And she realized she didn't come to be forgiven. She came to witness the proof that he never needed her permission to begin again. She didn't mean to find it. Not really. It was her last morning in the coastal town. The innkeeper had made coffee too strong and toast too weak, and the silence in the room had begun to feel oppressive. So she wandered toward the shore with her scarf pulled tight and her hands buried in her coat, telling herself it was just for the air. The beach was nearly empty, just gulls and driftwood and seaweed that curled like sleeping snakes. The tide was low, the wind mild, and there, down by a row of weathered stones, something stood where nothing should have been. A sculpture, not behind glass, not on a pedestal, just there, planted in the sand like it belonged to the ocean. Two carved figures, no taller than a child, abstract but deliberate. One faced forward, carved mid-stride, arms swinging behind like a tether. The other reached out, mid-movement, caught between steps. The distance between them was only inches, but it felt enormous. The title was carved into a driftwood plank hammered into the sand. 3 years later. No artist name, no plaque. Just the signature chisel marks she now knew by heart. A boy in a red hoodie stood nearby, holding his mother's hand. He pointed at the sculpture and asked, What does it mean? The man beside it, tall, calm, familiar, smiled faintly. Martin. No fanfare, no spotlight. Just him in a wool coat and scuffed boots, hair swept back by the wind. He looked older still, but not tired. There was something anchored in him now, something you couldn't fake. He knelt beside the boy. Sometimes, Martin said, we reach for something that's already walking away. The boy frowned. That's sad. Martin's voice was steady. It's only sad if you think everything has to end with an answer. The boy nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. Children were good at accepting mystery. Elena watched from the boardwalk, just far enough away that her breath didn't make sound. She hadn't planned to see him again, not after the door, not after those final words, but this wasn't conversation. This was observation, witness. She stared at the sculpture. The one walking wasn't angry. The one reaching wasn't pleading. It was simpler than that, like two truths that couldn't occupy the same space. She thought of the day she handed him papers, the applause ringing behind her, the way she'd smiled like it was a milestone, not a massacre, and she understood, finally, with a clarity that stripped her of every justification. She didn't lose him when he walked out the side door that afternoon. She lost him when she looked him in the eyes, handed him the envelope, and called it closure. She thought choosing herself would lead to growth. What she never understood, until now, was that loyalty was growth, that staying when it was inconvenient, inconveniently quiet, uncelebrated, that was where strength lived. Martin didn't need applause. He never did. He needed space, air, a partner who saw him not as ballast or scaffolding but as structure. And when she failed to give him that, he left, not loudly, not in anger, but clean, surgical, like a man who understood that peace wasn't something you earned after conflict. It was something you walked toward, even if it meant walking alone. She didn't approach him, didn't speak. She stood still, long enough for the tide to shift, then wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, turned slowly, and walked back toward the inn, each step slower than the last. There was no fight left, no fantasy to reclaim, just this truth. Some stories end long before the final word is spoken, and some messages don't need a reply. They just need to be heard.